Imagine, for a moment, that our civilization is not the first, that before us, long before, there were other, advanced cultures that raised cities, mapped the stars, and left behind monuments that we now view with awe, but which were erased by time, cataclysms, and oblivion. The official history tells us that humanity, as we know it, is barely a few thousand years old. Nevertheless, when we look closer, when we dare to ask the uncomfortable questions, we discover cracks in that narrative. Places and objects that do not fit, myths that seem too precise to be mere tales, and ruins that whisper a truth far deeper than we believe. In this documentary for Sleep, we are going to explore those cracks, not to provide definitive answers, because perhaps they do not exist, but to open windows of wonder. We will journey from the accounts of Atlantis to the temples buried beneath millennia of sand. We will walk through the corridors of time in search of traces of civilizations that perhaps walked before us. And as we do so, I invite you to something simple. Join us on this journey by subscribing to Dato Terra. This channel is a place where curiosity finds calm, and the mysteries of Earth and the universe become stories you can listen to even as you close your eyes. So, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let the mystery envelop you. We begin our journey with a question that changes everything. What if Earth holds memories of forgotten worlds that existed long before us? The history of Earth is so vast that we can barely comprehend it. More than 4.5 billion years compressed into a planet that continues to rotate silently, as if nothing that happened on its surface had left a trace. When we think of human history, we usually reduce it to a small line in time: the emergence of agriculture, the invention of writing, the construction of cities, the Industrial Revolution. But that line is merely a fleeting spark in the immensity of the cosmic calendar. Our civilization, which we consider so advanced and unique, occupies barely an instant compared to everything that has occurred on this planet since its birth. If we were to reduce the history of Earth to a single day, modern humans would appear in the last few seconds before midnight. And in those seconds, we have raised pyramids, explored space, designed satellites, and created a globalized world. However, the question that emerges is uncomfortable. Is it possible that we are not the first to do so? What if before us, there existed other cultures, other advanced peoples, who also reached their peak and finally vanished without a trace? Conventional science tells us no, that our species, with all its ingenuity and achievements, is the only chapter of advanced intelligence on Earth. But it is worth remembering that time is history's best eraser. The planet's surface is not an intact archive that keeps everything in perfect order, but a blackboard that is constantly erased and rewritten. Tectonic plates subduct entire continents into the depths. The oceans advance and retreat, wiping out coastlines, cities, and landscapes. Glaciations destroy everything in their path, and volcanoes, in a single eruption, can bury what took centuries to build. Everything we see today is destined to transform, to disappear, to dissolve into geological oblivion. If our civilization were to disappear tomorrow, what would remain of us in 1 million years? Perhaps some fossil remains, maybe petrified ruins under layers of sediment, and little more. Steel rusts, glass shatters, plastic fragments, until it becomes invisible dust. Even our radio signals and our satellites will eventually dissolve into cosmic noise. And if this would happen to us in just 1 million years, what would happen to a hypothetical civilization that existed 10 million or 100 million years ago? It is most probable that nothing of it would remain. The planet would have absorbed it, as it absorbs everything else. Despite that logic of oblivion, we find fragmented traces that defy the official narrative. Monuments that seem too advanced for the era in which they were built. Ancient maps that show coastlines that should not have been known. Strange artifacts found in geological strata where they should not be. These findings are often catalogued as anomalies, dating errors, or simple coincidences. But when observed together, they form a disturbing mosaic that suggests that perhaps we do not know the whole story. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is one example, a complex of temples that is more than 12,000 years old, meaning thousands of years before the official invention of writing and organized agriculture. Its stones, carved with reliefs of animals and abstract figures, show a level of organization and symbolism unexpected for that era. According to history books, that culture should not have existed. Another example is Pumapunku in Bolivia. There we find colossal blocks carved with millimetric precision, fitted together in ways that defy the technology supposedly available thousands of years ago. Some cuts seem to have been made with modern tools, but the dating places them in a remote past. These examples are like whispers of a lost memory, glimpses that make us wonder if our view of history is not just the surface of an iceberg invisible underwater. We live convinced that human progress is an ascending line, always forward, always upward. But what if it is not? What if our history is more like a cycle? Civilizations that arise, reach a point of splendor, and then collapse, erased by time, forgotten by descendants who start anew. Ancient cultures already sensed this. For the Maya, history was divided into suns, cycles of creation and destruction. In the Hindu tradition, time is measured in yugas, eras that succeed one another in an endless wheel of birth and death. And everywhere on the planet, from Mesopotamia to the Pacific Islands, we find accounts of cataclysms, floods, fires, great deluges, ice ages. These accounts are so universal that it is hard to believe they are merely isolated inventions. Perhaps they do not describe a single event, but a collective memory of multiple catastrophes that wiped out entire civilizations. Look around you, our brilliant cities, our roads, our bridges, our airplanes. All this seems indestructible to us, but it is not. If we were to disappear tomorrow, a few centuries would be enough for nature to cover everything, with forests, water, and dust. In a few thousand years, barely ruins would remain, and in a few million, perhaps not even that. It is unsettling to think, but we ourselves could become a lost civilization like the ones we now imagine. Perhaps someone millions of years from now will find a strange fossil or a fragment of glass and wonder who we were. Perhaps they will ask the same question as us: were they the first or just the last of many attempts? Earth guards secrets in its depths. Each layer of rock is a page written in a language we are just beginning to comprehend. Geologists find fossils of creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. Paleontologists discover traces of entire ecosystems that suddenly disappeared due to global catastrophes. If life itself has gone through so many beginnings and endings, why not think that intelligence, culture, and civilization might also have followed that same pattern? Perhaps there were peoples who walked under suns that no longer exist, who looked at different stars in forgotten skies, and who were erased from the terrestrial memory. This first chapter is not meant to convince you, but to invite you to open your mind, to consider that our history might be merely one more layer in a millennial palimpsest written over the traces of previous worlds. If these questions awaken in you the same fascination as they do in me, I encourage you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here, we explore the mysteries of Earth and the cosmos together, calmly, without haste, letting curiosity be our guide. Each chapter is an opportunity to immerse yourself in the unknown, to allow the questions to accompany us even as we rest. So, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself, because what follows will take us to the realm of ancient myths. Tales that for centuries were considered simple fables, but which may be the last echoes of civilizations that existed long before ours. If there is one element common to all human cultures, it is the power of myths. They are stories that traverse generations, accounts transmitted on nights of fire and silence, in temples and in rituals that often seem to conceal more than they reveal. The curious thing is that although ancient peoples were separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of kilometers of distance, many of their myths are too similar to each other. They speak of destroyed civilizations, of global cataclysms, of civilizing heroes who emerged after a disaster, of peoples who existed before ours and who vanished beneath unleashed waters or fires. Atlantis, for example, has fascinated humanity for centuries. Plato, in his dialogues, spoke of a powerful empire that dominated a large part of the known world until a single day of divine fury was enough to sink it into the sea. Skeptics say it was a political allegory, a moral fable invented to convey lessons about power and arrogance. But others wonder if it could be a distorted memory of something that actually happened, because accounts of submerged lands and sunken cities also appear in cultures far removed from Greece, from Celtic myths to legends of the Pacific Islands. Something similar occurs with Lemuria, a mythical land that supposedly existed in the Indian Ocean, or with Mu, the lost continent of the Pacific. In both cases, modern science assures that there is no geological evidence that such continents ever existed. But then, why do so many cultures in such different places speak of lands swallowed by the sea? Could it be a collective memory of real cataclysms, reinterpreted over time as mythical stories? The universal deluge is another powerful example. In the Bible, it is described how the waters covered the earth, and only a few survived in an ark. But this is not an exclusive account of the Judeo-Christian tradition. The Sumerians in the Epic of Gilgamesh already told an almost identical story thousands of years earlier. In the Americas, indigenous peoples also narrated destruction by floods. And in Asia, numerous traditions recall great floods that erased entire civilizations. The coincidence of so many different versions of the same catastrophe suggests that perhaps there was a real event. Perhaps at the end of the last glaciation, when the melting of the ice caused a sudden rise in sea level of more than 100 meters in a few millennia. The fascinating thing about myths is that although they are tinged with symbols and metaphors, they sometimes hide details that seem difficult to invent. Descriptions of darkened skies, seas that devour entire lands, or even lights in the firmament that herald destruction. They could be human interpretations of real natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, meteorite impacts, tsunamis. And if these memories were transmitted for centuries or millennia, it is not unreasonable to think that they ended up converted into foundational myths. There are those who believe that, behind every ancient myth, lies a seed of truth, that the tales of civilizing gods like Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in the Andes, or Oannes in Mesopotamia, could be memories of sages, leaders, or perhaps visitors who arrived after a great disaster to teach the art of agriculture, writing, and construction anew. Perhaps they were not gods in the literal sense, but survivors of previous civilizations who transmitted their knowledge to peoples who were starting over. This echo of ancient myths seems to insist on one idea. What we have is not necessarily the beginning. What we remember as history might be just one layer, and beneath it could lie much older memories. Oral tradition, even in societies without writing, has proven capable of preserving surprising data for thousands of years. Aboriginal peoples in Australia, for example, transmitted stories that describe coastlines now submerged and that could only have been seen more than 10,000 years ago, when the sea level was much lower. Modern archaeology is beginning to recognize that these oral memories can be authentic records of geological facts. If we accept this, myths would no longer be mere inventions, but distorted windows into a past we do not fully comprehend. Perhaps they speak of real cataclysms, of lands that existed, of peoples who flourished and disappeared. And if so many cultures around the world insist on telling the same kind of stories, it is worth paying them more attention. Now, it is important to recognize that myths are not scientific evidence. They are stories, and as such, they are full of metaphors, symbols, and exaggerations. But as in all metaphors, there may be a nucleus of truth that has been preserved over time. The challenge is to learn to read between the lines, to distinguish the allegorical from the literal, the symbolic from the historical. Imagine for a moment that the myths of sunken continents, universal floods, and civilizing gods are not inventions, but memories of civilizations that truly existed before ours. It would be like hearing the distant echo of extinguished voices resonating across time. Voices that warn us of the fragility of civilization, the ephemerality of everything we build, how easy it is to lose everything in an instant. And if that is true, then every myth we have inherited could be more than a bedtime story. It could be a warning that history is not linear, but cyclical, that everything that seems eternal can suddenly crumble, and that our civilization is neither the first, nor perhaps will it be the last. Thinking about this is not comfortable, but it is necessary. It reminds us that what we have today is fragile, and that human memory is limited. Myths were the way antiquity preserved what should not be forgotten. We have books, digital archives, and technology, but even that could disappear someday. Perhaps the only things that endure are the accounts disguised as fables, told over and over, until they transform into something else. In this journey, pausing at ancient myths is like listening to the voice of the earth telling us its story in a poetic key. It does not give us exact data, but it does give us signs. It reminds us that we are not the absolute beginning, but merely a chapter in a much longer story. If all this evokes the same mix of awe and curiosity in you as it does in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we like to take myths, science, and imagination and intertwine them to ask ourselves bigger questions. Because perhaps we will never find all the answers, but the simple act of searching for them connects us with something deep, something that unites us with all those who looked at the stars before us and wondered the same thing. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we will delve into something even more tangible: the impossible traces in stone, constructions that seem ahead of their time and that pose the uncomfortable possibility that there were ancient hands that knew more than we believe. In the heart of our planet, where accounts blur between myth and history, we find silent witnesses that challenge our comprehension: the stones. While trees fall, bones disintegrate, and human memories vanish, rocks remain. But sometimes, those stones guard a secret that seems to scream from the depths of the past. A secret that suggests there were ancient hands, perhaps wiser than we imagine, molding them with a skill that we still struggle to replicate today. One of the most intriguing examples is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. There, on top of a hill, lie the remains of a ceremonial complex built about 12,000 years ago, long before official archaeology believes organized cities existed. Giant T-shaped monoliths, carved with reliefs of animals, abstract symbols, and scenes that seem to tell stories we have yet to decipher. According to what we were taught, humanity at that time was barely a collection of hunter-gatherers, without the structure or knowledge necessary to erect such a work. And yet, they did it. How? Where did the idea, the knowledge, the coordination come from? Some think that place was the beginning of civilization. Others suggest it was the legacy of something even older. Now travel mentally to Bolivia, to the heights of the Altiplano, where Pumapunku is located. There, multi-ton stone blocks are carved with a geometric precision that surprises even modern engineers. Perfect right angles, clean cuts, exact fittings that resemble pieces of a gigantic puzzle. There are no obvious marks of rudimentary tools, nor a clear explanation of how they were transported or placed. The dating places them in a remote past, but the perfection of the cuts suggests techniques that supposedly did not exist at that time. The same occurs in Sacsayhuamán, in Cusco, where enormous stone blocks fit together as if they were soft pieces molded before hardening. Not even a sheet of paper fits between the joints. These walls have withstood earthquakes that toppled modern constructions, suggesting a very advanced knowledge of anti-seismic engineering. How did they manage to do it? Without cranes, without cement, without machinery. The official explanation speaks of ingenuity and human effort, but many look at those stones and feel there is something more, a knowledge perhaps inherited from an even older time. In Egypt, the pyramids of Giza remain the greatest enigma. Officially built about 4,500 years ago, we are told they were raised in a few decades, with copper tools and an organization of workers. But the pyramids are aligned with surprising astronomical precision, oriented almost exactly to true north, and their arrangement seems to reflect the Orion's belt. How did they achieve such a feat? Without modern instruments. The texts do not give us clear answers, and the perfection of these constructions continues to fuel the suspicion that there was more than simple manual labor involved. Stonehenge in England adds another mystery. Circles of multi-ton stones brought from kilometers away, placed in a way that marks the solstices and equinoxes with accuracy. Was it an astronomical observatory, a calendar, a temple? But the culture that built it left no writing, and the exact purpose remains an enigma. How did they know how to align those stones with the sky? Across the planet, we find similar examples. Underwater temples in Japan, megalithic ruins on Easter Island, the submerged structures on the coasts of India that seem to have been entire cities before the sea reclaimed them. What unites all these constructions is not just their size or complexity, but the sensation that they belong to a tradition older than what we believe, as if they were fragments of a much larger puzzle, pieces that speak to us of civilizations that mastered techniques and knowledge that official history does not recognize. Traditional archaeologists offer explanations based on human effort, organization, and time, and there is no doubt that humanity has proven to be ingenious even with simple tools. But there are details that resist. that seem made with advanced technology, astronomical alignments that require precise knowledge of the sky, and similarities between cultures separated by oceans that supposedly never met. How to explain that in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Asia, pyramids were raised with similar purposes and such similar geometry? Why did so many peoples choose the same monumental form? Some suggest that the answer could be the inheritance of previous knowledge, transmitted after a cataclysm, guarded in the memory of the survivors, and shared across generations. Perhaps those stones are the last visible echoes of forgotten civilizations, civilizations that understood the world in a way we are just beginning to intuit. Imagine walking through those places in silence, feeling the enormity of the stones, the perfection of the cuts, the alignment with the sky. It is like listening to an ancient language we do not comprehend, but that resonates deep within our being. A language made of geometry, of proportions, of symbols etched in rock. That language seems to tell us that we are not the first to seek answers, that others were here before, facing the same questions about the universe, time, and existence. And if we accept that possibility, then every stone becomes a window to the unknown, not definitive proof, but an indication that the history of humanity may be much older and more complex than we believe. The impossible traces in stone are not just tourist ruins, they are challenges, enigmas, that invite us to look beyond the obvious, to question what we take for granted, to open our minds to the possibility that human civilization has had several beginnings. If these reflections awaken the same awe in you as in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we like to travel those paths of mystery together, pausing in front of the stones and asking ourselves what secrets they hold. Because in each chapter, we explore the boundary between what we know and what we intuit, between what we can measure and what we can only imagine. And we do so calmly, without haste, like someone who contemplates a ruin at sunset and lets the questions speak louder than the answers. In the next chapter, we will continue to expand that vision, but no longer from the immobile stones, but from the cycles of the earth itself. Because if civilizations have disappeared again and again, perhaps the explanation lies in the cataclysms that erase and restart history, as if the planet itself had a memory that reinvents itself every so often. Earth, although it seems stable under our feet, is actually a restless stage, always in transformation. Mountains that rise and wear away, seas that advance and retreat, glaciations that cover entire continents and then melt, leaving new landscapes. Throughout its history, our planet has been a place of constant creation and destruction. And it is in that dance of cataclysms and rebirths where one of the most unsettling questions arises. How many times has the history of life been reset? And with it, the possibility of vanished civilizations. The geological records speak clearly. In the last 500 million years, there have been at least 5 major mass extinctions, moments when life, as it was known, was virtually wiped out. The most famous is the one that ended the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, caused by the impact of an asteroid that left behind a gigantic crater in Chicxulub, Mexico. But that was not the only one. Long before, there were others, even more devastating, such as the Permian extinction, about 250 million years ago, when more than 90% of marine and terrestrial species disappeared. These events remind us that life is fragile, and that everything that seems stable can disappear in an instant. If life itself has been erased and reinvented so many times, why not consider that human, or even pre-human cultures, might also have suffered the same fate? We may not have direct evidence of advanced civilizations in such remote epochs, but the possibility is there, open as a question. Closer in time, during the last glaciation, enormous ice sheets covered a large part of the northern hemisphere. Just 20,000 years ago, cities like New York or Berlin would have been under kilometers of ice. When that ice began to melt, the sea level rose more than 100 meters in a few millennia. Coastal cities, if they existed, would have disappeared under the waters without a trace. And today, in many parts of the world, explorers find submerged remains of constructions that could correspond to those times of transition. Think of the submerged city of Dwarka on the coast of India. Ancient accounts already spoke of a sacred city that had been swallowed by the sea. And in the 1990s, submarine explorations found structures underwater that looked like streets, walls, and temples. It is still debated whether they are natural formations or human remains, but the coincidence with the myths is difficult to ignore. The same occurs in Yonaguni, Japan, where under the waters, terraces and steps are found that appear to be worked by human hands. Some say they are natural formations, others believe they are vestiges of a culture lost more than 10,000 years ago. Cataclysms are not only a thing of the distant past. Even in recent historical times, we have seen how devastating a single event can be. The eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79 buried Pompeii in a matter of hours. The earthquake and tsunami of Lisbon in 1755 destroyed a large part of the city and was felt across the entire Atlantic. Imagine then, much larger catastrophes multiplied on a planetary scale. It is not difficult to understand how entire civilizations could have vanished, leaving barely any traces. The ocean, which we see today as a natural border, also holds the memory of these resets. When the glaciers melted, vast expanses of land were covered by water. What is now the North Sea, between England and continental Europe, was an inhabited plain just 10,000 years ago, known as Doggerland. Peoples lived there, hunted animals, and today everything is submerged. This finding shows us that it is not unreasonable to think of cities or settlements that disappeared on now sunken coastlines. And given that the first human cultures tended to settle near rivers and seas, much of their memory could be under the ocean, inaccessible to us. The earth seems to have cycles, as if it breathes in eras. Life is born, multiplies, reaches complexity, and then an external or internal event resets everything. Sometimes it is an asteroid, sometimes a colossal eruption, sometimes an abrupt climate change. Perhaps the same has occurred with cultures. Perhaps before ours, there were others that flourished for thousands of years and were then erased by the same cycle of destruction that has marked the natural history of the planet. What is most disconcerting is the universality of the memories of cataclysms. We already saw in the previous chapter how myths of floods appear everywhere, but there are also accounts of fires, darkened skies, sudden ice ages. They are like the scars of humanity's collective memory, and those scars seem to tell us that our species has already gone through moments close to the end. The difference is that this time, we have written records, global cities, and technology, but even that, seen on the scale of geological time, is fragile. Imagine if tomorrow, an asteroid like the one at Chicxulub headed towards Earth. Current technology could detect the impact, but would we be capable of stopping it? Perhaps not. And if it fell, most of our civilization would disappear in a few days. In a few centuries, only ruins would remain. In a few million years, barely fossil traces. The question then is not if it could happen, but how many times it has already happened before. The notion that we are eternal is an illusion. We are part of a cycle, and the planet constantly reminds us, with its earthquakes, tsunamis, eruptions, and storms. Our fragility should fill us with humility, not fear. Because if we accept that the Earth holds memories of forgotten worlds, then we understand that we are part of something much greater, a story that did not begin with us and will not end when we disappear. If these reflections resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we pause to contemplate how fragile we are, and, at the same time, how amazing it is to continue existing at this very moment. Each chapter is a reminder that life is a brief miracle within an ocean of time, and that perhaps there have been many miracles before us. By subscribing, you not only join a channel, but a community of curious people who prefer open questions to easy answers. In the next chapter, we will shift our focus from global cataclysms to the messages that seem to have been etched in stone, not only in the form of constructions, but in symbols, alignments, and shapes that might have been a language shared by distant peoples. Because perhaps those megaliths, scattered around the world, are more than ruins. Perhaps they are the memory of a knowledge that survived the disaster and that still whispers to us from the past. If there is one thing that connects us with ancient cultures in an almost immediate way, it is the constructions they left behind. Stones that have resisted the passage of time, walls that defied earthquakes, temples aligned with the sky. But the most disconcerting thing is not their size or durability, but the pattern that is repeated in places so far removed from the world. The same shapes, the same symbols, the same architectural obsessions. It is as if a hidden language had been transmitted across continents, a language made of stone that speaks to us in silence from thousands of years ago. Think of the pyramids of Egypt, 3 giants that rise in the desert, oriented with astonishing precision toward true north, and aligned in a way that seems to reflect the arrangement of the Orion's belt. They are not simple tombs, as is often said, but monuments designed with a level of knowledge that is surprising even today. Their perfect geometry, their proportions, the relationship between their height and their base seem to have been calculated with advanced mathematical formulas. And yet, official archaeology tells us they were built with rudimentary copper tools and the effort of thousands of workers. Now, mentally cross the ocean and travel to Mesoamerica. There, the Maya and Aztec cultures raised very similar pyramids in form and purpose. They were also aligned with the celestial bodies, served as cosmic calendars, and were centers of spiritual power. How to explain that 2 cultures, separated by thousands of kilometers and without apparent contact, came to erect such similar structures? Coincidence or inheritance of the same knowledge transmitted from more ancient times? Easter Island adds another piece to the puzzle. The moai, those gigantic statues that look toward the horizon, are not just sculptures. They are part of a ceremonial system that seems linked to the observation of the celestial bodies. The precision with which they were placed suggests they were not decorations, but markers that connected sky and earth. Something similar occurs with Stonehenge in England, where the stone blocks mark the solstices and equinoxes, as if their builders wanted to ensure that the seasons were never forgotten. Further east, in Asia, we find temples like Borobudur in Indonesia or Angkor Wat in Cambodia, both built with an obsession for astronomical symbolism. Borobudur reflects the shape of a cosmic mandala in its design, while Angkor Wat seems to reproduce the Draco constellation on Earth. Once again, the sky and the stone are united in the same language. The most disturbing detail is that this pattern is not limited to pyramids or temples. In many cultures, megalithic stones were placed in circles, avenues, or clusters that seem to respond to the same impulse: to fix in stone a knowledge that should not be lost. It does not matter if we talk about the Karnak alignments in France, the dolmens in the Iberian Peninsula, or the Nabta Playa circles in Egypt, which predate the pyramids themselves. All of them seem to insist on the same idea: to fix in stone a knowledge that should not be lost. And what was that knowledge? Everything points to astronomy, to the cycle of the sun, the moon, and the stars. In a world without digital clocks or calendars, observing the sky was the only way to measure time and to survive. But what is surprising is the level of precision with which they did it. In many cases, the alignments are so exact that they are difficult to replicate even with modern instruments. The ancient knowledge of the cosmos. This leads us to ask ourselves how these supposedly primitive peoples managed to calculate with such accuracy. Was it truly the result of generations of patient observation, or did they inherit this knowledge from an older source? What makes this language of stone more mysterious is that it appears in places that, according to official history, were never connected. How is it possible that the same architectural and astronomical patterns are repeated in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in England, in Asia, and in the Pacific Islands? Some archaeologists explain it by saying it is natural for human cultures to look at the sky and seek similar ways to record it. But others suspect the coincidence is too precise. Perhaps, they say, there was a common origin, a mother civilization, that transmitted that knowledge before disappearing. When contemplating these megaliths, one has the sensation that they are telling us something, as if they were words of a forgotten language. A language that is not pronounced with sounds, but with geometric forms, with astronomical orientations, with mathematical proportions. That language is etched in rock, because rocks resist time, because their builders knew that everything else would be lost, but the stone would remain. Perhaps that was their message: do not forget what we learned. Perhaps the pyramids, the temples, the stone circles are not just places of worship, but warnings and legacies. Legacies of peoples who perhaps lived before us and who did not want to vanish completely into oblivion. Imagine walking through these places in silence, at night, under the stars, the shadow of the megaliths projecting onto the ground, the alignments pointing to precise spots on the horizon. You feel that you are not simply looking at ruins, you are deciphering a message. A message that says others were here, that they also looked at the sky, that they also sought their place in the universe. And the most disconcerting thing is that this message is still alive. Every time an archaeologist, a tourist, or a curious person stops in front of those stones and asks why they are there, the message is renewed. The megaliths fulfill their function to remind us that we are not the absolute beginning, that perhaps there were others before, and that perhaps there will be others after. If this language of stone awakens the same fascination in you as in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we explore these mysteries together without haste, letting the questions settle in our minds like echoes of a past that still resonates. Because every stone, every monument, every alignment is also an invitation to imagine, and in that imagination, perhaps lies the key to what we are and what we were. In the next chapter, we will continue traveling, but this time through the universal accounts of peoples. We will see how cultures that never knew each other share the same myths of floods, fires, and civilizing gods. And in doing so, we will discover that humanity, although divided across continents, seems to guard a common memory that speaks to us from the deepest part of our history. Universal narratives and the shared memory. If we observe carefully, we discover that humanity, despite its cultural, linguistic, and geographical diversity, shares a single narrative heart. In all corners of the world, from the frozen lands of the Arctic to the Pacific Islands, peoples have transmitted surprisingly similar myths. Stories of floods that destroy everything, of fires that fall from the sky, of heroes who guide humanity after destruction, and of sages or gods who teach the lost arts anew. These accounts, repeated over and over in different forms, seem to be the voice of a universal memory that connects the human species in a deep echo. The case of the universal deluge is perhaps the most emblematic. We all know the biblical version in which Noah builds an ark to save his family and the animals from the end of the world. But long before that story was written, it already existed in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, where the character of Utnapishtim survives a great flood sent by the gods. The Greeks also narrated that Deucalion and Pyrrha survived a deluge by throwing stones that transformed into human beings to repopulate the earth. And in the Americas, peoples like the Maya, the Inca, or the Hopi have similar versions of floods that ended entire civilizations. It is difficult to think that this recurrence is a simple coincidence. If we broaden our view, we see that not only floods appear on all continents, there are also myths of devastating fires. In Australia, the Aborigines recount that the sky burned in flames and that the earth was scorched before everything began anew. In India, ancient texts, like the Mahabharata, speak of weapons that unleashed terrible fires, capable of sweeping away entire cities in an instant. And in Norse traditions, Ragnarok describes how fire and destruction will cover the world before it is reborn in a new age. There is another motif that repeats in a disturbing way, that of the civilizing gods or sages who arrive after the catastrophe. In Mesopotamia, there was talk of Oannes, a creature half fish and half man, who emerged from the sea to teach humans the art of writing, agriculture, and construction. In the Andes, Viracocha appears after a deluge to guide men and teach them to build temples and cities. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is the god who brings knowledge and the calendar. And on many Pacific islands, there is talk of visitors from afar, bearers of wisdom and new laws. The recurrence of these stories poses an inevitable question. What if these accounts were not independent inventions, but memories of the same shared ancestral event? Perhaps at some point in prehistory, a great cataclysm swept the known world, and the survivors transmitted their experience through oral accounts that over time transformed into myths. The difference between one tradition and another would simply be the local color, the different names, the symbols unique to each culture, but the nucleus would be the same: destruction, rebirth, and the guidance of beings who preserved knowledge. The most fascinating thing is that these accounts not only speak to us of destruction, but also of continuity. The message they transmit is not just that everything is lost, but that something always remains. There is always a thread of memory that survives and allows for a new beginning. Perhaps that is the deepest function of myths, to be the memory of humanity when writing and archaeology did not exist, to be the voice that reminds us that we have been to the brink of the abyss before and returned. Today, we know, thanks to science, that at the end of the last glaciation, abrupt climatic events occurred, such as the Younger Dryas, a period in which the climate changed drastically in a very short time. Sudden floods, massive thaws, changes in sea level. If entire peoples lived through that, it is not strange that they would remember it as the end of the world. And if they transmitted it from generation to generation, it is not surprising that centuries later, those accounts transformed into the great mythologies that still accompany us today. Universal myths also have another constant: the idea that humanity is neither unique nor eternal, but part of a cycle. In Hinduism, there is talk of the yugas, eras that succeed one another repeatedly in an eternal recurrence. The Maya described the creation and destruction of several suns, worlds preceding ours. The Navajo peoples narrated that before this era, other lands and other skies existed, all destroyed before reaching the present. These accounts do not describe a straight line, but a circle in which everything starts over. When one observes the universality of these accounts, it is difficult not to feel that there is something more than simple coincidence, as if humanity, in its deep memory, knew that it is neither the first nor will it be the last. As if these accounts were reminders that time erases but also repeats. Imagine the first peoples telling these stories under the stars, in front of a fire that illuminated the night. Imagine the children hearing how the world had ended once and how it had been rebuilt afterward. They were not listening to simple fables, but to warnings, teachings that had to be transmitted so that humanity would not forget its fragility. And now, thousands of years later, when we hear those stories in books, movies, or rituals, we still feel them resonate deep within us. If these universal memories awaken the same fascination in you as in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here, we like to contemplate myths, not as isolated tales, but as a mirror of what we are and what we were. Each chapter is an invitation to think that humanity shares a common memory, an echo that still vibrates, even though we believe we have forgotten it. And by subscribing, you join a community that is not afraid to ask big questions, even while resting or letting themselves be carried away by the calm of a documentary for sleep. In the next chapter, we will look up at the sky, because if the earth guards memories in its myths, the stars seem to have been the universal book of all cultures. There, in the heavens, we find the keys to a knowledge that seems too advanced for its time. Celestial maps, perfect alignments, and observatories that still surprise us with their precision today. Perhaps in those skies lies the clearest clue that there was ancient knowledge shared by all. The sky, a universal ancient textbook. From humanity's first days, the heavens have been an open book for those who paused to observe it. The stars, the moon, and the sun not only marked the rhythm of the seasons, but also became guides, calendars, and sacred symbols. What is surprising is not that ancient cultures looked at the sky that is natural. What is truly disconcerting is the level of precision with which many of them recorded astronomical movements that, according to official history, they should not have understood with such accuracy. It is as if they had inherited knowledge that preceded their time, a wisdom that did not fit the technological stage they were in. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built observatories capable of tracking the movement of Venus with surprising accuracy. The cycle of that planet, of 584 days, was recorded with such precision that their calculations barely differ from those made by modern astronomy today. The El Caracol Temple in Chichen Itza has windows aligned with the equinoxes and with the risings of Venus, which indicates an astronomical mastery that should not have been possible without advanced instruments. And yet, there it is, carved in stone, resisting time. Something similar occurs with the Andean cultures. In Machu Picchu, the Intihuatana stone, called the place where the sun is tethered, marks the solstices with accuracy. The Inca knew when the sun reached its highest point, and how its light fell upon the stone at precise moments of the year. For them, it was a sacred altar, but it was also an astronomical observatory disguised as a temple. And if we look further back, in the Altiplano of Bolivia, we find in Tiwanaku alignments that seem to point not only to solstices and equinoxes, but also to longer cycles, which implies a deep knowledge of the sky. Europe is not far behind. Stonehenge is not simply a circle of mysterious stones. Its arrangement marks the summer and winter solstices, functioning as a cosmic calendar in the middle of the Stone Age. The precision with which the stones align with the sun and moon suggests that those who built it had a sophisticated understanding of celestial movements, and it is not alone. In Ireland, New Grange, a burial mound more than 5,000 years old, has a passage that is illuminated only during the winter solstice, as if its builders wanted to ensure that the rebirth of the sun on the shortest day of the year was never forgotten. In Asia, the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia are arranged in a way that reproduces the Draco constellation on the Earth, as if the sky had been reflected in stone. And in Japan, the Asuka complex also shows astronomical alignments that are surprising for their precision. Everywhere in the world, we find the same thing: cultures that seem to be obsessed with the sky, and that accurately recorded movements that today require telescopes or advanced calculations. But perhaps the most enigmatic example comes from Africa. The Dogon tribe in Mali had ancestral knowledge about the star Sirius. According to their accounts, Sirius is not a single star, but a binary system. The curious thing is that the second star, Sirius B, is invisible to the naked eye and can only be observed with modern telescopes. The Dogon knew of its existence for centuries. They described its 50-year orbit and spoke of its density as if they had access to astronomical information impossible for a culture without instruments. Anthropologists have debated extensively on how they acquired this knowledge. Some think it might have been transmitted by modern travelers before being recorded by the Europeans. Others, on the other hand, believe that this account is an echo of much older knowledge, inherited from a lost source. The fascinating thing about all this is that these are not isolated examples, but a global pattern. Wherever we look, we find ancient cultures with an astronomical mastery that seems disproportionate to their technological development, as if the heavens had been the great book of a previous civilization, and those fragments of knowledge had survived in later peoples. The obsession with aligning temples, pyramids, dolmens, and megaliths with solstices, equinoxes, and key stars seems too universal to be a simple coincidence. Imagine what this means. If cultures that were supposedly primitive recorded the heavens with such precision, what does that say about our understanding of history? Is it possible that they inherited fragments of a knowledge that existed before? Perhaps the myths of sages or civilizing gods who descended from the sky were not simple metaphors, but memories of those who guarded that knowledge and transmitted it to the survivors after a cataclysm. Perhaps the obsession with the stars was not only spiritual, but also practical, a way to remember the cycles of destruction and rebirth they had witnessed. Astronomy was not for them a simple pastime. It was the way to understand the order of the universe and to anticipate changes that could mean life or death for a civilization, knowing when the rains would come, when to sow, when to harvest. But beyond that, it was the way to inscribe themselves in the cosmos, to feel that they were not alone, to understand that the sky was a reflection of the earth, and the earth a reflection of the sky. That principle, as above, so below, seems to have guided many ancient cultures, uniting the celestial with the terrestrial in the same language. When we contemplate these achievements today, we feel awe, but we also feel a slight vertigo, because we realize that official history does not always fit with what we see. The enigmas of astronomical knowledge are like cracks in the accepted narrative, windows that invite us to imagine a more complex, richer past. Perhaps with civilizations that looked at the same skies long before us. If these questions and enigmas awaken the same curiosity in you as in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we search with calm and awe, pausing to contemplate these cosmic coincidences that seem too perfect to be chance. Because in every alignment, in every observatory, in every astronomical myth, there is a message that traverses time. The human being has always sought its place in the universe, and by subscribing, you join a journey in which the stars are not just points in the sky, but keys to a deeper mystery. In the next chapter, we will change perspective. We will move slightly away from the stones and skies to delve into the realm of scientific speculation and alternative theories. Because there are researchers and thinkers who believe that the evidence points to something bigger, that we are not the first technological civilization on Earth, and that what we call progress today might be merely an echo of what already existed. Alternative theories and the fragility of the record. When official archaeology fails to explain certain enigmas, a fertile space emerges where alternative theories flourish. There are many voices that contend that humanity, or at least advanced forms of it, could have existed long before we believe. According to the traditional view, civilization was born about 10,000 years ago, with agriculture and the first permanent settlements. But there are those who think that date is too recent, that history is deeper, older, and much more complex than what we have been told. One of the most influential researchers in this field is Graham Hancock, who has championed the idea of a mother civilization that disappeared at the end of the last glaciation. According to him, more than 12,000 years ago, an advanced people existed who transmitted their knowledge to later cultures. The evidence, according to Hancock, would be in the great megalithic monuments, in the astronomical precision of many cultures, and in the universal myths that speak of floods and cataclysms. His hypothesis has not been accepted by academia, but it has resonated deeply with millions of people who feel that conventional explanations are insufficient. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis reinforces this idea. At the end of the last glaciation, about 12,800 years ago, a sudden cooling of the climate occurred that drastically changed the course of history. Some scientists believe that this event could have been caused by fragments of a comet that impacted the Earth, causing global fires, tsunamis, and the collapse of entire ecosystems. If an advanced civilization existed at that time, it would have been destroyed in a matter of days, leaving barely fragments in the form of myths, symbols, and ruins that defy time. But alternative theories do not stop there. Some independent researchers point to strange objects found in geological layers, too old to contain human artifacts. There are those who speak of out-of-place artifacts, or OO parts, supposed hammers embedded in rock, millions of years old, perfectly carved metallic spheres found in deep mines, or inscriptions in caves that seem to show astronomical knowledge. Official science usually dismisses these findings as natural anomalies or interpretation errors. But for many, they are indications of something more, a proof that advanced cultures existed that disappeared before we could record them. The speculation goes even further in some circles. There are those who think that technological intelligence could have arisen more than once in the planet's history, not just with humans. Carl Sagan, at one point, even raised this possibility as an intellectual exercise. If the planet has existed for billions of years, what prevents another intelligent species, distinct from ours, from having evolved and disappeared in the deep past? We do not have proof of it, but neither can we completely rule it out. The absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. Other theories suggest that the knowledge of ancient cultures came from the exterior. The ancient astronaut hypothesis holds that beings from other worlds visited Earth in antiquity and transmitted their technology and wisdom to humans. This idea, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken, has been highly criticized, but continues to capture the imagination of millions of people. The accounts of gods descending from the sky, of chariots of fire, of weapons that light up like suns, are interpreted as memories of encounters with beings from elsewhere. It is possible that part of the knowledge we see in ancient observatories, temples, and myths comes from contacts with intelligences outside our planet. Beyond the speculative, these theories fulfill an important role. They remind us that official history is not an absolute truth, but an interpretation based on the evidence we have found so far, and that much remains to be discovered. Every new archaeological finding, every ruin that is unearthed, can change what we think we know about the past. Imagine for a moment that Hancock is right, that 12,000 years ago, there was an advanced global civilization. Imagine that its cities were destroyed by a cataclysm, that the few survivors transmitted fragments of their knowledge to nomadic peoples who over time gave rise to Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Maya, and so many other cultures. Suddenly, what we call the beginning of civilization would be merely a rebirth, an echo of a previous world. What would it imply to accept this? How would it change our perception of who we are? Alternative theories, although not always provable, invite us to keep an open mind. They remind us that the history of humanity is not closed, that there are still mysteries to solve. Perhaps we will never have definitive proof of civilizations preceding ours, but the mere fact of considering the possibility makes us look at the ruins, the myths, and the stars with new eyes. It reminds us that the arrogance of thinking we know everything is dangerous because it can blind us to the unknown. If these ideas awaken the same mix of skepticism and fascination in you as in me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we do not seek to impose certainties, but to explore questions. We like to walk along the edge between science and speculation, not to replace one truth with another, but to broaden the horizon of the possible. Because sometimes, in those cracks of doubt, is where true wonder emerges. By joining, you become part of a community that understands that questioning is as important as answering. In the next chapter, we will look even further toward the very origin of life. Because if there is a possibility that civilization has arisen more than once on Earth, there is also the possibility that life itself is not entirely terrestrial. And that idea connects us with another equally fascinating hypothesis, panspermia, the possibility that the seeds of life came from the stars. Life from the stars, the pantheistic hypothesis. If there is one question that has always accompanied us, it is how life began on Earth. Science has told us that at some point in the primitive oceans, simple molecules combined to form increasingly complex structures until a spark of chemistry transformed into biology. But even in that explanation, there is a deeper mystery. Where did those molecules come from? Was life an improbable accident that occurred only here, or is it part of a much larger cosmic process? The theory of panspermia proposes an audacious answer, that life was not born on Earth, but arrived from space, perhaps in meteorites loaded with organic molecules, perhaps in comets that traversed the solar system, maybe in interstellar clouds that bathed our planet with the necessary ingredients. In this view, life would not be a unique phenomenon, but a seed that travels between worlds, igniting biological fires wherever it finds the right conditions. The surprising thing is that this is not just speculation. Scientists have found amino acids, the basic building blocks of life, in meteorites fallen on Earth. Organic molecules have been detected in comets like 67P, Churyumov-Gerasimenko, and in the atmospheres of distant planets and moons. Even on Titan, Saturn's moon, there are seas of liquid methane that could harbor complex chemical reactions. All this suggests that the universe is full of the ingredients for life. If so, why think that Earth is unique? But there is something even more intriguing. Some researchers have proposed that not only molecules arrived, but perhaps complete biological structures, resistant bacteria, that could survive the space journey. It is known that certain forms of extremophile life can withstand almost impossible conditions. Intense radiation, vacuum, extreme cold. Experiments have even been carried out on the International Space Station, where microorganisms survived, exposed directly to space for years. This opens up the possibility that life, in its simplest form, can travel from one planet to another, protected in rock fragments ejected by cosmic impacts. Imagine what this means. Life on Earth could be the child of the stars, a cosmic visitor that found a fertile place here to develop. In that view, we would not be isolated, but connected to a much larger network of living worlds scattered throughout the universe. And if life arrived here once, why wouldn't it have arrived again? It could be that the history of life on Earth has had several beginnings, several seeds, several attempts. Some go further and speculate that even intelligence could have arisen more than once, not only as a terrestrial evolutionary product, but as something that is part of a cosmic cycle. If life is an interplanetary traveler, then perhaps so too are ideas, myths, and memory. Perhaps what we remember as gods descending from the sky, or sages bringing knowledge, is nothing more than a symbolic way of describing that link with what comes from outside. Panspermia invites us to rethink our view of history, because if life came from the stars, then our existence is part of a much greater project, a cosmic experiment in which Earth is just one more station. And if that is true, then perhaps the previous civilizations we imagine did not arise in isolation, but in dialogue with a universe full of life. Perhaps the memory that we are not alone is deeply etched within us, disguised as myths, symbols, and astronomical obsessions. Critics of panspermia say that, even if life came from outside, that only moves the question, where did it begin then? And it is true. The theory does not resolve the final mystery, but it broadens it. Instead of a local origin, it shows us a universal origin. Instead of a spark in a lost corner, it suggests a fire spread throughout the entire cosmos. It is a perspective that completely changes our position in the universe. From being an improbable accident to being part of an infinite current of life. Imagine for a moment that this is true, that life on Earth is a sibling of life on other worlds, that our atoms not only come from dead stars, but that our cells also come from cosmic seeds that traveled millions of years before reaching here. Suddenly, the idea of civilizations preceding ours acquires a different nuance. Perhaps it is not just about terrestrial peoples who disappeared, but a broader cosmic history in which we are merely one chapter. When contemplating the night sky full of stars, we can feel that connection. Perhaps in some of those brilliant points there are worlds where life also flourished, where entire civilizations arose, shone, and became extinct. And perhaps in some way, we are connected to them. Panspermia reminds us that the frontier between the terrestrial and the cosmic is not as rigid as we believe, that our history may also be the history of the universe itself. If this vision of the cosmic origin of life inspires you as much as it does me, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here, we not only explore the Earth, but also its connection with the cosmos. We like to think that every question about our past is also a question about our place in the universe. By joining, you join a community that views life as a shared cosmic journey, a journey that we are just beginning to understand. In the next chapter, we will focus on something more intimate and human, the fragility of our own memory. Because even if life travels between the stars, we, as a civilization, remain vulnerable to oblivion. Writing, oral tradition, archaeology, all are ways of fighting against disappearance. But in the end, human memory is as fragile as the most eroded stone. And in that fragility lies another key to understanding why, perhaps we will never know with certainty, which civilizations preceded us. The fragility of memory and the risk of oblivion. Memory is the thread that connects a civilization to its past. Without it, everything we are would dissolve like sand between the fingers. But the truth is that our collective memory is fragile, more fragile than we usually admit. Stones wear down, books are lost, hard drives become corrupted. Even oral memories transmitted from generation to generation change over time until they become something else. And without memory, a civilization can disappear completely, as if it had never existed. Today, we confidently look at our ability to record information. We believe that writing, printing, and digital archives guarantee us permanence. But it is enough to stop for an instant to see that even these tools have limits. Many texts from antiquity were lost forever because a library was burned, because an empire fell, because a scribe did not copy a manuscript. The famous Library of Alexandria is the clearest symbol of this. No one knows for sure how many texts were lost in its fires, but some estimate that it contained records of much older cultures, perhaps knowledge that today we would give anything to recover. In a few hours of fire, centuries of memory disappeared. And if that happened just 2,000 years ago, what might not have happened before? How many memories disintegrated without leaving even a spark? The Mesopotamian clay tablets that we still preserve are barely a fraction of what once existed. The Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Maya codices, the Egyptian papyri, all survived in minimal quantities, like fragments torn from an immense book that we can no longer read in full. Oral tradition is also powerful, but equally vulnerable. Indigenous peoples have transmitted their stories for thousands of years, and yet each narrator adds, omits, or transforms details. What begins as a precise memory of a real event can, over time, become a myth, then a fable, and finally, a symbol. Yes, the most important memories are preserved, disguised as tales, but their original content is lost in the distortions. Perhaps this is how the stories of floods, catastrophes, and previous peoples occurred. What we hear today as mythology may have been, in its origin, a living memory of real events. Archaeology gives us fragments, but never the complete picture. A discovered city, a tomb, an inscription. They are pieces of a puzzle with thousands of missing pieces, and we will never know if the ones we have are in the correct order. In fact, everything we call official history is nothing more than an interpretation constructed with what we have managed to conserve. What we do not find, what was erased, what we never recorded, remains hidden in the silence. Imagine for a moment that our civilization disappears tomorrow. Entire cities collapse, satellites fall, digital libraries become inaccessible. Perhaps a few human groups survive, and after 1,000 years, they look at the rusted ruins of our skyscrapers without understanding how they were built. Perhaps they invent stories to explain it. Perhaps they remember us not as what we were, but as legends. And in a few more millennia, when even those ruins have disintegrated, perhaps nothing will remain. What would a new civilization think if it found only a fragment of corroded metal? How would it reconstruct our history from that? The same could have happened many times before. Entire civilizations erased not only by cataclysms, but by the simple passage of time and the fragility of memory. And if this is possible, then our known history might be only one more layer in a soil composed of infinite forgotten memories. Even today, in the heart of the digital age, our memory is at risk. We believe that electronic archives are eternal, but the truth is that they depend on fragile systems, servers, energy, formats that become obsolete. A hard drive, forgotten in a drawer, can become unreadable in just a few decades. A global blackout, a technological collapse, would be enough to erase a large part of what we have recorded. And if that happened, the only things that would remain would be human memories, as fragile and malleable as they have always been. It is unsettling to think that oblivion is the rule, not the exception. The history we conserve is barely the tip of an iceberg sustained by miracles. That a tablet was not broken, that a papyrus did not disintegrate, that a carved stone resisted centuries of wind and water. Everything else is lost, dissolves, is erased, as if it had never existed. This fragility forces us to look with humility at what we think we know, because the truth is that everything we know about the past may be only a minimal fragment of something much larger. Perhaps the previous civilizations, if they existed, were lost not only by cataclysms, but because their memory was erased. And the only things left of them are echoes disguised as myths, symbols carved in stone, and enigmas that we still do not understand. If these reflections on memory and oblivion resonate in you, I invite you to subscribe to Dato Terra. Here we seek to keep curiosity alive, because understanding how fragile our traces are helps us to value even more what we have. Each chapter is an effort to rescue from silence what history almost left behind, to stop and listen to what still whispers from the ruins and from the ancient accounts. By joining, you become part of a community that understands that memory is the most vulnerable, and at the same time, the most valuable treasure we have. In the next chapter, we will close this journey with an even deeper reflection. What would it mean to accept that we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth? Because that idea, beyond archaeology and myths, invites us to look at ourselves differently, to understand our fragility, but also our connection with something much greater. And there, in that closure, we will find a teaching that can transform the way we understand our present and our future. The final reflection, the cosmic cycle. Imagining that we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth is more than an exercise in curiosity. It is a profound change in the way we understand our own existence. Because if before us there were other peoples, other cultures that also built, dreamed, and looked at the sky, then our history is not an absolute beginning, but merely one chapter in an immense book that we still do not know how to read completely. And accepting that forces us to think differently about who we are, where we are going, and what might happen to us in the future. Since we began this journey, we have seen stones that seem too precise to be the work of primitive cultures, myths that speak of universal deluges, accounts of civilizing gods, and astronomical evidence that suggests more advanced knowledge than expected. We have also reflected on the cataclysms that have erased entire worlds, and on the fragility of our own memory, as vulnerable to oblivion as that of any people who preceded us. All of this forms a mosaic that does not offer absolute certainties, but does offer a powerful sensation that history is deeper, more mysterious, and more fragile than we believe. Accepting the possibility of not being the first gives us a lesson in humility. It reminds us that our civilization, however brilliant it may seem, is as vulnerable as those that might have existed before. An extreme climate change, a devastating war, an asteroid, and a global pandemic. Any of these events could quickly reduce our complex network of cities, technology, and culture to a barely recognizable memory. And in a few thousand years, perhaps not even that would remain. The arrogance of thinking that we will be eternal is a mirage. The truth is that on the scale of cosmic time, we are as ephemeral as a spark in the darkness. But this idea is not only a reminder of fragility, it can also be a source of inspiration. Because if there were others before, and if there will be more after us, then our existence is part of a greater cycle, an unending river of life and civilization that flows through time. In that river, every attempt, every fall, every rebirth adds to a broader account. Perhaps what we build now will be the seed of something that others will find in the future, just as we have found fragments of those who might have existed before. Imagine that someday, millions of years from now, another intelligent species traverses the Earth and finds ruins buried deeply under layers of rock. Perhaps they will be traces of roads, fragments of corroded metal, collapsed buildings. Perhaps they will look at those remains and ask themselves the same question as us. Who were they? What did they dream of? Why did they disappear? That hypothetical future shows us that the question we now ask ourselves about past civilizations is also the one that will be asked about us. And that connects us in a cycle of curiosity and mystery that transcends time. Accepting that we are not the first also forces us to rethink our role in the universe. If life came from the stars, if panspermia sowed worlds, then civilization is not a local accident, but a natural expression of the cosmos. Perhaps we are not the only ones, neither here nor elsewhere. Perhaps intelligence is a spark that ignites repeatedly in different worlds, at different times, in different forms. And if so, our responsibility is even greater, to care for that spark, preserve it, transmit it, because we are part of a history that did not begin with us, and that will not end with us. The most valuable thing about thinking that we are not the first is not finding definitive proof, but the perspective it gives us. It makes us more humble, more conscious of the ephemerality of our conquests. It invites us to look at our cities, our technologies, our borders with less arrogance and more gratitude, because everything we have could disappear tomorrow, as so many times before in the history of this planet. And at the same time, it drives us to dream of what we can still be, to ask ourselves what legacy we want to leave for those who will come after, whether human or not. Upon reaching this point, it is possible that you feel that we have traveled a long and mysterious path. We have journeyed from the millennial stones to the stars, from myths to scientific theories, from cataclysms to the fragile memory of humanity. And although we do not have definitive answers, we do have something more valuable: questions. Questions that keep us awake, even as we rest. Questions that remind us that curiosity is the most powerful engine we have. If this journey has awakened the same fascination in you as in me, I invite you once more to subscribe to Dato Terra. This channel exists to accompany you on those nights of mystery, to explore the unknown with you calmly and with awe. Here, you will not find closed certainties, but open paths. And by joining, you not only support this project, but also become part of a community that values questions as much as answers. Perhaps we will never know with certainty what happened to all the civilizations before ours. Perhaps some of our suspicions will be confirmed one day, or perhaps they will always remain in the realm of doubt. But the important thing is not to have the final answer, but to keep searching, because in that search lies the essence of what makes us human, the capacity to marvel, to imagine, and to keep asking. So, as this documentary comes to an end, I want to leave you with one final thought. It does not matter if there were others before us. It does not matter if one day there will be others after. What matters is that we are here, now, in this fleeting instant, with the opportunity to look at the sky and ask ourselves who we are. And in that gesture, in that question, we connect with all those who came before and with all those who will come after. The history of humanity is not written in stone, but in questions that we have not yet answered. And perhaps in the silence of the night, those questions are the best company we can have.